Thank you for listening to HIV Unfiltered. This is a space for real and unfiltered conversations about HIV. Now, I'm your host, Edward, and today I'm joined by Richard Adkins at 35 years old, a lifetime survivor based out in the DC area. He's been an advocate since age of 13 on the Adolescent Trials Network, and he's since worked in groups like the Maryland Coalition in HIV and Aging, PAVE, CAB, and the Heterosexual Men's Special Interest Group. In 2024, am I correct? You received the Mary Bowman Award for DC Health
Yes.
for his work toward ending the epidemic. Now, today we're also going to be talking about his journey as a lifetime survivor and how HIV criminalization has kind of shaped him in today's world, and why we think decriminalizing HIV matters. So I did kind of send you a few different questions that I would love up. Now, you've been an advocate since the age of 13 on the
Mhm.
Adolescent Trials Network. What do you remember most vividly about being that young and sitting at a table with doctors and researchers?
Yeah, so that was, looking back, the first experience I had where I had meaningful involvement. The doctors were there on a Friday night. They could be doing anything else, but they were there to get our feedback, our perspective on the minds of youth and the different studies or protocols that they were launching. For example, this was early 2000s, and they were looking at ways to increase youth engagement about taking medicine. And they wanted to know what we thought about various early apps, or if getting a text message would help. And they were just receptive to what we had as feedback, that there was no wrong answers. They were just there to hear from us. Being that young on the board, it was intimidating.
Yeah.
Reluctant to answer at first for fear of being wrong or saying something that was common knowledge. But the things that I were thinking in my head, I would then hear other people say it. And it was like, okay, you're on the right track with your thinking. Like, it gave me the confidence that, all right, you are on the right train of thought. Things that you think are important are important. And so as time went on, and by 16, 17, having done this for 3, 4 years, I've now understood how the protocol worked, found my voice, and really took off. But I just owe it to being in those spaces where still young and developing, but organizations give you the platform to voice what's on your mind and your opinion and show that it matters.
What are some of the things that you told them that they still practice today and use?
Yeah, so some of the things that we talked about was from the standpoint of what youth are comfortable sharing and disclosing, that we stress the emphasis on confidentiality, that was something that, like, hey, your app may be perfect in terms of what it does, but like no teenager is gonna like feel comfortable opening this when someone else can go through their phone and then see like everything that you're sharing. That, and then also just kind of wanting to understand our lives of like, okay, where are we getting our information from? Where do we hang out? Like, where would advertisement be most effective? Like, how can you reach us, engage us with this brochure you're planning? Is this something that, as a teen, that I would be open to looking and reading and learning about HIV or whatever the topic is?
Mhm. Now, how old were you when you found out?
So, when my family first found out, I was 5 years old, that my mom was pregnant with my youngest sister at the time. And that's when she learned her diagnosis. And then, out of precaution, they wanted everybody else in the family to get tested. And so, my older sisters, fathers, they were all tested. And then my test was the only one that came back positive. Before I knew it, I was on medication, and all of a sudden I went 5 years without taking medicine, and now I'm taking it and not knowing how to swallow pills. It's like, what is going on? Like, explain to me, why do I have to take this medicine? And I was told because I was sick. And
Yeah.
my understanding was like, hey, if you're sick, you're supposed to get better. And I'm not. Like, I'm just taking this medicine with no insight. And so
Mhm.
eventually, stopped asking, why am I taking this medicine? And started asking, what happens if I don't? At that time, I was about 7, going on 8. And that's when a therapist, I met with them a few times, built up rapport. But then I'll never forget the session where they were reading from a picture book and they explained to me that you have this virus living inside your body. It's important you take your medicine every day to prevent the virus from getting stronger. But most importantly, you don't tell anyone, otherwise, they may treat you bad or different.
And the fact that they even added that last part to that is just is
Hmm.
huge itself too as well.
Yeah.
So when you served for the Adolescent Trials Network, we kind of already touched this a little bit, but the youth engagement and the informed consent for the young people living with HIV. How did you feel about that part? Like it, not being able to share something that means so like that's part of you now. Like how did that consent part work? Especially
So
that young.
yeah. So being involved in the research field that young, I learned that like you have rights as a patient, that you're free to read the study, see what it's about, ask all the questions, and at any moment you don't have to participate. That I think most people have this idea of like participating in the research involve these like untested like drugs that they inject to you and like we'll see how they work. But there's plenty of things from mental health studies to things like what helps people take medicine better, be more adherent to different things that aren't related to HIV. But just being involved in that and having that kind of relationships with the doctors when it was time to potentially be involved in studies, it was like, hey, I trust these people, I built rapport with them, I feel comfortable asking questions about what's going on. And then also looking on the other side, seeing how the data that's drawn from these studies, I know that that's important to for the change we're looking to see. They need to study the various populations to understand what's going on, what are the issues, what are the barriers, how do we get through that, and just let me see both sides of the research field, and just it's nothing to find out more about a study, and just at any time you can back out, you can go with do the study, but just knowing all your rights as a patient, that's what I felt like gave me the best viewpoint of serving on the.
Now, your bio says that you combined your lived experience, storytelling, and analytical trials or analytical insight to drive systems change. What does that look like in a practice when you're in front of the providers or government officials? Like, do you, because you're still doing this, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so the data is what drives dollars, but stories are what moves people to get the change. When you're talking about lifetime survivors, there's a lot of data that we don't have. And so it's important that we fill in the gaps of like being able to make up for that.
Mhm.
And I think it starts with listening to community, that hearing from others and not just myself, and finding commonalities of struggles that we all have, what we go through, and involving like, okay, behind my story, like what are the common themes of this? And then also understanding how information. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. No, bear with me. My screen just went white. Okay. So where was I? Finding commonalities and then understanding what it is that the language or what do providers or government officials need to see. For example, I was on a panel about HIV and aging, and I saw like a lot of people were like, okay, we're talking about aging. Why is this 30 something year old in a room on this panel? And addressing that head on and saying that, like, okay, what does aging mean? Aging is a process of getting older. And I have been getting older with HIV for 35 years now. And
Yeah.
just having that shift in some people's minds of like, okay, wow, I didn't think about lifetime survivors from the perspective of aging. Or if we're talking about isolation, that it's common to associate isolations with older adults, but given a perspective that we as lifetime survivors too have experienced isolation from not knowing anyone else growing up living with HIV and thinking that you're the only one, or when you get older after pediatrics care, how hard it is to find another person who lived with HIV since birth to be able to connect and relate to. Just forming those and to the stories that I tell to be able to speak not just on behalf of myself, but on others who will not, for whatever reason, get the opportunity to, may not feel comfortable, but just providing a voice for the voiceless.
Nice, yeah. Okay. Yeah, the storytelling part does kind of make a huge difference. There's a lot of people who are very blinded by the unknown, and that's scary to them, so they don't want to know it.
Mhm.
So yeah, I completely understand. That's awesome. Now, you received an award, the Billman Award in DC in 2024 for your services toward the ending HIV epidemic. What did that recognition mean to you personally, and what part of your work do you think it honored the most?
Yeah, so it meant a lot. I knew Mary personally, that a lot of people know her for her poem Dandelions, but she was someone who we grew up together at Children's Hospital. Got to see her, talk to her, experience her. The shy young woman before while she was still developing her voice to practice poetry. Just I remember her being adamant of she's going to change the world with her poetry. And then watching as she did that, performed unapologetically advocating on not just for herself, but for communities, whether that's people living with HIV, young girls, or anyone in her circle. And I remember like just thinking like, wow, this is impressive. And I can't even talk about HIV without fear of someone finding out or just the uncomfortability of it. And here was this person who just did it so effortlessly and brave. And I remember asking her, how do you find the strength to do this? And she said, if you know your why of why you're doing this, your purpose, then that's all you need. The rest will take care of yourself. And so years later, when I started speaking out as an advocate, my why was to change the world and not just for people living with HIV, but for anyone who has gone through tough times and feels that they can't do something because of their circumstances, showing them by example that I've done it. And like it starts with the belief that you're meant for bigger things and whatever it is you're going through and just seeing that through. As far as the work that I've done, in addition to the surveying, ATN, been involved with various HIV works from community advisory boards to camps to faith-based advocacy work to support groups, planning World AIDS Day projects, just being a voice and willing to show up. And fortunate to have my peers nominate me. And yeah, just it brought tears to my eyes finding out just because I knew what Mary represented to the
Yeah. And I mean, you've done so much for so long. You didn't expect getting that award? You didn't have any kind of an inclination?
I didn't know that the award I didn't know that she had the honor of having the award named after her. When I first found out after crying, we shared the same mentor growing up, and she's one of the first people I told, and she just was like, "No, you deserve this. Everything you've done, the
Yeah.
progression you've shown since she first knew me to where I am now, and yeah, just kind of live and through advocacy, like just continue not to leave any doubt, continue to walk in a legacy that would make not just Mary proud, but for those who I come in contact with and just have the privilege of speaking and sharing my story or advocating in front of.
Do you think that after everything that you've been through and finding out, like if you had not of, that test came back when you were 5 years old and it came back negative, do
Mhm.
you think you'd still be doing the same thing?
Yeah.
I know I didn't write that
Yeah,
one, but
no, no, that's like so since that moment of finding out, my life spiraled since then. That when we found out, both me and my mom were told we wouldn't live past the year 2000, it turned what was already an addiction that she had into a full on escape mechanism from reality. And just it led to losing our home and being homeless for 2 years. It led to me temporarily being placed in foster care. It led to me being out of school. And all this happened right back to back. And I just had this belief that life was over, that this is reality now. Asking God, what did I do to deserve this? Why is life like this? And just from things turned out better, that my mom was able to beat her addiction. We found stable housing, was able to get back enrolled in school. But from a standpoint of self confidence, from belonging, from thinking I could mean something to this world, it was shot. It took me years to recover that. Thinking back to what the therapist said of not to tell anyone what you're going through, otherwise they may treat you bad or different. That applied for everything outside of HIV, just how I talked with my peers, how I let people get close to me. And so, yeah, there was, if I could look back and would I still be doing this work? I don't know, because the young boy that I remember before finding out was so carefree, a love for the world. But then that boy was going through turmoil. Like, I think if you would have just told him, like, hey, things will get better one day, I don't think he would have believed it. So I'm just feeling like I got a second, third chance at life and just making the most of it. So, yeah, I never thought that advocacy would be for me. I went to school for accounting, didn't want nothing to do with HIV. But just seeing from a standpoint of with seeing how the world kind of forgot about us,
Mhm.
that because mother to child transmission had almost been eliminated, people thought that was the end. I remember just going to a conference and there's no mention of those born with HIV, and there was no mention of heterosexual males either. And here I thought that that asked myself, do I belong in this place? If there's nothing that's mentioning my identity, like shouldn't it go to someone else who fits who they're talking about? But at the same time, I thought back for the young men and women who I knew in the support groups through camps who would never be in this space to
Yeah.
advocate for themselves and just kind of like, hey, someone needs to let them know that there's those of us who are struggling. And if that person's not showing up or that person's not present, like I have to do what I can. And so before I left that room, I told the organizers who I was with my story, not, but I let them know, like, hey, it's not about me. It's about the people who went through things like I did, but they're still struggling, that they still are not being heard, not being recognized. And
Yeah.
long story short, but that's how I found my way to advocacy.
Okay. I like it. Now, you mentioned accounting.
Yes.
How does that analytical side of thinking shape the way that you look at data and funding and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah. So they both feed off of each other. That with so much chaos in my early life, numbers were the only thing that makes sense. So they were like my go to kind of like, all right, I may not understand anything else about this world, but I know that two plus two is always going to equal four. And so when looking at it from the HIV lens, especially with all like the funding cuts that are going on now,
Hmm.
I'm able to see like the impact of a 15% reduction, like what that means for overhead, for outreach, for staff, like just knowing everything that's involved with those numbers, where's that funding going to go to? Like, how do we cut? Like, how do we keep core services without sacrificing everything else? And understanding that those in power like have to make tough decisions to make that happen. And then also when like looking at the numbers and one of the populations most affected by HIV is women of color, and it's like a lot of attention is given to them to reduce the epidemic, but then it's like, okay, what about the people who they're getting HIV from, the heterosexual males? And there's not like that same proportionate attention, and it's more seen as like kind of the afterthought. And just the analytical mind of me wonders of like, okay, like if we help the men, then we're also helping the women by preventing them from acquiring HIV. It makes sense to me, but like kind of talking to funding providers and like it's
Yeah.
still an area that's still like largely intact. And
Wow.
then on the other side, how HIV helps me in my accounting life is that the first word of it is human. When I look at people interact with clients or staff on my team, just valuing those interpersonal connections that being able to listen to people, being able to, when they show up in front of you, treat them as human, listen with intent. That often I feel like accountants have a reputation of just being cold about the numbers, but like being able to just show empathy and be able to hold a conversation, I think goes a long way. And I credit that to everything I learned from the HIV field and movement.
Yeah. Now, when I want to know a little bit more about you outside of like your advocacy work, because you are human, you have a life. I mean, you enjoy cooking, writing, biking, scuba diving. I want to know how you got into scuba diving. Can you share a story from those passions that reminds you a little bit about your diagnosis, or even kind of helps you forget about it as well?
Yeah. So all those things were, well, I'll start by saying that my hesitancy to get in an HIV field was that I didn't want to be known as the HIV guy. I didn't want to be the poster child. Didn't want all that people knew about me was to be HIV. And just from discovering things like I've always loved food, and so growing up poor with no money, like I realized it was easier to get the things that I want to eat if I make them as opposed to buying them from the restaurants where like the cost is higher, and
Hmm.
just kind of from not knowing how to do it, but being open and willing to learn. A lot of trial and error for all my hobbies you name that just we weren't born knowing how to do those things, but we learn, we adapt, we figure out what doesn't work, and we go from there. From scuba diving, it started off years ago. I had the opportunity to do Make a Wish, and we ended up going to Disney World. And one of the excursions that I got to pick was scuba diving. I went with my family. None of them wanted to do it, but I was like, "Hey, this isn't about y'all. This is my wish. I want to do it." And I remember just being so excited, like, and what I remember most about it, besides being in the water with all the different fishes, tortoises. I think they even had a couple of sharks in there. But I just saw like a young boy who was like, "Wow, look at someone in there like scuba dive, like that's so cool." And I remember like waving at him, and he waved back and was just so excited. And so just thinking about that kid from now on, like, hey, the scuba diver waved to me, but just taking that opportunity for joy and like passing it forward. And so I recently just got my certification. It was a couple weeks process, had some setbacks, and one of the days of training, but just like determine like, hey, I want to get this, want to complete it, and just from that times where I had to repeat one of the courses, just going forward, like how do I learn from this? Let me pay attention to what areas where I struggled at. Let me do my research, watching videos. Let me talk to the instructor. Let me talk to friends that I know that are scuba diving, and stuck with it. And I'm excited to my next trip. Hopefully somewhere warm. Here in Maryland, DC area, the water around is like kind of too cold. So I'm hoping somewhere in Florida,
I was gonna
Caribbean.
say,
Yeah,
I was in Miami not too long ago, and that water is warm.
yeah.
Yeah, it's like
That is, yeah.
75, so
Mhm.
80 something degrees. And then the Keys get a lot hotter too as
Yeah,
well.
yeah. This
Yeah.
water was like 50s, and we were wearing thick wetsuits to accommodate for that. But
Yeah.
yeah, not fun.
Still, yeah. That's kind of how it is up here in Seattle. The water is still pretty cold, even in the summer. Well, I think that is actually all the time that we have here today. Again, your story is amazing. I've learned a lot about you since we kind of just met. You know, we didn't really have a better chance to getting to know each other, but I'm sure if you're going to be in LA this in August, I'm sure I'll see you there. If not, then I'll see you at the next what is it called? I'm missing.
U USCHA.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, I'll see you at the next one.
Yeah, and who knows? I may find my way out to Seattle to sometime. We'll see.
You should. The summers are amazing here. I've been to a few cities in during the summertime, but nothing beats it out here. You got
Yes.
surrounded by mountains all around. Not right near. There's like 4 or 5 mountains, within like a day's ride. It's beautiful. All right. Well, thanks for spending this time with us on HIV Unfiltered. Now, if you find this to be helpful, drop us a review, share the episode, and join us for the next one. Unfiltered conversations about living with HIV is what we need to do at all times. Until then, keep thriving.
Thank you.